Anthony Frisina here with the Disability Channel and Above and Beyond. We've been talking to so many great people here today about the employment programs from the Disability Channel coming to Hamilton, and here we have another great guest. Megan, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing
Thank
fantastic.
you for having me.
Aw, thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the employment programs are going to continue to do for persons with disabilities and persons of all persons here, and what it's going to bring to the community, and how you see it as a benefit as a mother of a person with a disability, and how you also see it as your business with the center in Hamilton.
Well, so first of all, actually having a program is a big start, right? Because a lot of education needs to happen for employers as well, as to what those usually little tweaks are that can be made to make a position at any company accessible.
Absolutely.
And accessibility looks different for everybody. Some accessibility is physical accessibility, such as what you might need, for example, with physically being able to get into a building. But there's other accessibility considerations as well, where, for example, fluorescent lighting is horrible for somebody with, like my children, who fall on the autism spectrum. So little tweaks sometimes are all that are needed.
Yeah.
And then I do have some friends, for example, that are visually impaired, and they may just need a different reader to be able to read any emails that are coming off of the computer, because the monitor may not be set up properly. So it may be either an actual reader, or it may actually be a different program or a different app, for example, that will make the material more accessible to them from a visual standpoint. So accessibility in and of itself looks different for every individual, as you know.
Through the different lenses of equity, diversity, and inclusion, it does look different for different people. And often a lot of employers look at it as being a high price tag, so to speak.
Sometimes they do, yes.
So it's a lot about alleviating those misconceptions about persons with disabilities, and actually giving persons with disabilities the opportunity to become employable, to be able to gain soft skills that they might otherwise may not have, to be able to work with the Disability Channel's employment platform, to learn skills if they're interested in TV production, social media, and all of that encompasses what we do here at the Disability Channel and TV.
Absolutely.
So.
And most of the time, the individual, him or herself, actually knows how to access funding, for example, to be able to make that position in something that's accessible for that individual. So sometimes it's just a quick question to that person: how do we accommodate any needs that you have? Because even myself, personally, I've worked in small businesses and large businesses before becoming self-employed. And one large business that I worked at in downtown Toronto had to actually come in and just change the cubicle. Because as a tall woman, I actually was replacing somebody who had been very short. So they had to literally come in and raise everything in the cubicle, right? That's not necessarily something, it's not something related to a disability, unless you go with 5'10" as being a disability. But it's something that just made it more accessible for me as a tall woman to be able to perform that job. And it's not difficult to do that.
No, it's simple ergonomics, as you alluded to.
Exactly.
And so then going forward with this program, with the Disability Channel and the employment support, it's about finding the right candidate and seeing that we can place them in a position to succeed.
And being patient with that individual as well, because even if they're in a position that they know they can do, then there may be some small tweaks once they're actually on the job.
Definitely.
That can be done to be able to make it a little bit easier for that person to be successful in that job. Because it's not about spending tons of money to be able to get this candidate suitable for this position, because that person has already gone through the interviewing process. They've already been deemed as being the correct person for this job. So just help them make sure that they're successful for you, as well as you being successful for them.
Absolutely. And it's a win-win situation.
Absolutely.
And everybody wins. And even for society, to be able to see persons with disabilities, being in positions to succeed,
Absolutely.
being able to flourish is something that everybody wins, as I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But also looking at it from the perspective of your business gains, whether it be financially, and they just gain that respect.
The independence and the empowerment, as does anybody with a job,
Absolutely.
right? Anybody that has some form of reason to get out of bed every morning,
Absolutely.
right? COVID is a bit, it has made that very, very obvious,
Right.
because sometimes we don't have anything that necessarily has to happen for today, tomorrow, or the next month, but it does still then give us the importance as to how much a job and a role has in our lives for our own self-improvement.
Yeah, it's self-esteem, self-value.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about being able to work and so on as a person with a disability.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're in a position where a lot of people are now working from home.
Yes.
Can you speak to that in terms of how people with disabilities almost already knew that this was possible, but going forward, now that we're in a position that everybody quote unquote has to work from home, speak to that from your point of view and perspective as a parent, or just seeing something that has already been known by the disability community to come forth now.
It's about time.
Exactly.
To be very honest, it's about time that the business community recognized that it's not necessarily about being at a desk every single day at 8:30.
Absolutely.
And my children are younger. They're still not. My oldest, I should say, is 25, and she actually just graduated university, which was very cool for her. And she is lucky to actually have a position because she's worked for the city of Toronto for many, many years. So she already has seniority.
Wow.
Coming out, graduating, which is fantastic. But her accommodations really come into play in the interview process.
Right.
Because the socialization aspect is difficult for her. So being able to express that to an employer before walking in is always very tricky.
Absolutely.
So being able to, for example, do interviews now through electronic media, through Zooms, where you can actually do it from your home, makes things less stressful for people that might be having that social anxiety. Now hers is a very public position, so she still has to have that ability to interact socially. But it's still one less barrier, I should say, to actually receiving employment. So my twins, my son, they're turning 15 next week, and my son developmentally is 4. So the reality is that full-time employment is not necessarily in his future without a lot of support. So we're teaching life skills to see if I might be able to turn those into a business of some kind in the future for him, but he will always need that person to be able to do one-on-one support with him for any employment that he ever does.
Okay.
Because of his developmental delay.
Right.
And his cognitive delay. My other half of that twin set, she's going to take over the world. And is already finding her niche in the world at a very young age, which is pretty cool. She's a huge advocate, and the trick for her, or the key for her, is going to be finding something that actually pays to be able to, for her to continue taking over the world.
Right.
So she's probably going to have to do what Mama's done, where she creates her own job and her own paycheck. And even in my ability to support them growing up, I used to work outside the home. I used to have full-time employment, but because my son's needs were so high, I had to drop out of full-time employment. And I've worked at different part-time positions to be able to ensure that I can get him to all of his therapies, his specialist appointments, his doctor's appointments. So it's not only affecting the individual themselves, but it's also affecting the caregiver for that individual. And COVID has made that much more apparent to people
Mm-hmm.
that haven't necessarily encountered it
Absolutely.
until now. Because if, for example, you have never been involved with anyone with a disability before necessarily, and suddenly the schools are closed, you have children, who's going to look after your children when schools, daycare, everything like this is closed and you're employed?
Absolutely. You're talking
So
about
now
home.
you need to figure out how to work from home, if your employer will allow you to work from home, and hopefully you'll have been able to keep your job.
Yeah, and homeschooling your young ones, let alone
Mm-hmm.
your kids with disabilities, can also be very much a challenge as well.
Very much. I mean, there was some guidance, from what I understand, anyways, for neurotypical children to be schooled at home, but there really wasn't much support when we have our kiddos with exceptionalities as to how to actually do that learning at home. Because, you know, how do I teach my 14-year-old son his math at a grade 2 level when cognitively he's at kindergarten? I don't have those skills. That's not one of my pieces of paper
Right.
that I went to school for.
Absolutely.
So to be thrown into this so quickly, and importantly, we all need to be really watching out and looking after each other for COVID and supporting each other. But, you know, it's caused everything to change.
Absolutely.
And it's about time
Mm-hmm.
that it's not necessarily bricks and mortar and you have to be at your desk at 9 o'clock every day, and actually for employers to look outside the box and see which one of those jobs that are currently in their place of employment actually need to be at the desk, versus you can actually cut down your physical space, which it decreases your costs, your overhead, and those people can actually work from home.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more universal.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to backtrack to
Certainly.
something that you spoke about in terms of the interviews, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in terms of like disclosure, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a very, very touchy subject in the world of disability, how to disclose, when to disclose, you know, and disclosing the fact that, you know, your disability may be invisible,
Yes.
but you know it's still there and it still exists, and this is
And
how
you
it
need
matters.
those accommodations
And you
still.
need certain accommodations. So just speak to that a little bit briefly.
I wish that there was just one blanket statement that we could
Absolutely,
say, because it's such a fine line between needing to disclose
Yep.
whatever accommodations you might need versus whether or not that potential employer will see that as being a barrier. And going it and saying, well, but the Disability Act says that you can't
Exactly.
not hire me because of my disability, is different from the reality of what's actually happening out there.
100%.
And it's so difficult to really kind of maneuver that
How can you prove it? How can you?
yeah, and just be able to navigate that aspect of the interviewing process.
Right.
I wish that there was a blanket statement, but
Yeah,
there isn't.
there really
it's,
isn't.
It's so individual and individualized and based on what that person needs and their comfort level as
Right.
well, to be able to disclose to strangers.
Right. Right. And that's important. That's why we're bringing the disability channel and the
Mhm.
employment supports program and finding the right people for the right fit.
Yeah.
You know, and working with the employment supports programs,
Mhm.
our employment counselors, people in the community, and making
And
sure
the
that
individuals themselves.
and the individuals themselves,
They need to be at the table too.
they certainly need to be at the table. They certainly need to be involved in every step of the process
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that they're gaining the proper amount of support that they need to be
Mhm.
successful in that position.
Yes.
So, I just appreciate you, Megan, very much, and appreciate how much knowledge you bring to
Thank you.
this community. And so, you're with the center in Hamilton.
Yes.
Go tell people how they can get a hold of you.
You can just go to our website at thecenterinhamilton.com or search us on Facebook as well, The Center in Hamilton. And we're there. I do a Facebook Live, for example, every Tuesday. as well, and I'm always looking for questions that people are wrestling with or don't know where to get the information from, or topics to talk about as well, because the center in Hamilton is for the community. It's not for me, it's for the community, and we specialize in supporting parents and caregivers of individuals with special needs.
That's great. Megan, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having
All
me.
right.